Welcome back to CSS Breakdown, Book by Book, Season 4. In this episode, we walk with Will Durant through one of the most personal chapters of Fallen Leaves, his lifelong reflection on faith, Catholicism, and the tension between belief and reason. We really are about to embark on a pretty profound journey today. We're diving deep into Will Durant's most, intimate thoughts on religion, and these come straight from his work, Fallen Leaves.
Right. And it's crucial to remember this isn't just, a dry historical account. It's intensely human. It's his story of intellectual and spiritual evolution.
Exactly, and he called these his last words, didn't he? So it's got this mature, reflective quality, very personal.
Absolutely. And you get this incredible mix.
Mm.
Nostalgia for his childhood faith, but also really sharp critical thinking that, eventually led him away.
And even some pretty prophetic concerns he had about religion's future, especially in America.
Yeah, quite striking predictions looking back now.
So our goal today, our mission, is to unpack all of this. We'll look at his early upbringing, those pivotal moments of doubt, his really unique attempts to kind of reconcile faith and reason.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Definitely. And then, those unexpected predictions about where things might be heading. It's a real intellectual journey based on his own words. Glad you're all with us. Okay, let's unpack this. Durant begins by taking us right back to his roots, painting a remarkably fond picture of his early religious upbringing.
Yeah, he uses the phrase pious training received from nuns and priests. And he's very clear, isn't he? He says he has only the fondest memories of them.
Absolutely. He talks about the modest girls in the parochial schools, first in Massachusetts, then New Jersey. And he remembers these specific details, like the lovely litanies of the Virgin and the pleasant hymns they all sang.
It sounds quite idyllic almost, that sense of community, the shared ritual.
Right. And his respect for the teachers comes through so strongly. He even makes that kind of quaint observation that there were only two sexes then, which sort of speaks volumes about the time,
Yeah.
A simpler world, perhaps.
Yeah, it points to a different social framework, definitely. But beyond the general atmosphere, his specific education is key, too.
You mean the Jesuit connection?
Exactly. He expresses real gratitude for 7 years under Jesuit educators, both in academy and college. And this isn't just a minor point. Jesuit education back then was famous for its rigor, its intellectual discipline.
Right, so even though the goal was faith.
Paradoxically, yeah, it demanded serious critical thinking, analysis, grappling with complex ideas, philosophy, theology.
So you're saying it might have actually, inadvertently equipped him to question things later on.
It's a fascinating possibility, isn't it? Even as it aimed to instill faith, it gave him the intellectual tools for critique.
Huh. And why do you think he remembers only the best side of it all? He seems to gloss over any negatives.
Well, early positive experiences, especially religious ones, often create this really deep emotional bond, a kind of nostalgia, the community, the care he felt. Maybe that genuinely overshadowed any early doubts or conflicts he might have had.
Like a foundational comfort that sticks with you.
Precisely. It can shape your whole outlook, even if the actual beliefs change later. It provides that sense of meaning, belonging.
Sure.
It leaves a mark.
And the version of Christianity he was taught, it sounds incredibly gentle.
Very much so. He says it was all about a loving God, a gentle Christ, and ethics of kindness and chastity and filial devotion.
But what's missing is almost more interesting, isn't it?
Definitely. He explicitly says very little is said about Satan or hell.
Which are pretty major parts of traditional theology.
Right. And he even mentions the nuns had never heard of the Inquisition.
Wow. So it was a very sheltered, perhaps, a very positive spin.
Almost utopian, yeah. Seemingly scrubbed clean of the scarier, difficult bits.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He wasn't just any student, was he?
No, not at all. He calls himself their pet.
But then he adds.
He adds that he was also bright, alert, and troublesome.
Huh. That combination tells you a lot, doesn't it? Liked, but maybe a bit of a handful intellectually.
Absolutely. And there was a reason for the special attention, of course.
His parents.
They had destined him for the priesthood.
And that anecdote about the nuns taking him into the nunnery.
Yeah, the arcane of their simple nunnery, he calls it. A rare peek behind the curtain.
And feeding him the most convincing pies. I love that detail.
It's charming, isn't it? But it suggests something deeper, too.
More than just theology.
Exactly. It points to a really personal, almost familial connection. He wasn't just being taught. He was being nurtured, embraced.
Guided gently towards that path.
Seems like it. It highlights how warm and personal the relationship was, beyond just the ideas. Those pies were probably pretty good too.
Can't argue with a convincing pie.
So, given this incredibly warm, almost idyllic foundation, the shift, when it comes, is quite dramatic. What's fascinating here is how quickly that seemingly idyllic foundation began to shift under the weight of new ideas.
Right, he points to a specific time, doesn't he?
Yeah, sophomore year, 1905, that's when he says his inherited theology melted.
Melted. Not slowly eroded, but melted.
Exactly. It sounds quite sudden, almost abrupt.
Yeah.
And the cause?
Darwin and Spencer. Independent reading.
Huge names. For anyone listening, you have to consider the intellectual climate back then, early 20th century. These ideas were revolutionary.
Darwin obviously challenging the creation story with natural selection.
Right. Hitting the very foundation of traditional belief. And Spencer applying similar evolutionary ideas to society, ethics.
So for Durant, who'd been taught this gentle, loving Christianity,
It must have been a massive shock. A direct contradiction.
how do you reconcile a loving God with, survival of the fittest or a divinely ordered world with naturalistic evolution?
You really can't, not easily. It forced this profound, painful crisis for him. Faith versus science playing out right inside his head.
But it wasn't purely intellectual forces at play, was it? There were people involved, too.
Absolutely. He introduces Father James Mooney.
Described as the finest priest Durant knew.
Yeah, a really compelling figure. Stern but kind, ascetic and devout. Someone who was just burning himself out, guiding young men at Seton Hall.
Sounds like a powerful mentor figure.
Definitely. And Mooney clearly had a significant influence on Durant's next big decision.
Which was somewhat surprisingly.
Entering the seminary in 1909.
Which seems odd, given his theology was already melting.
It does seem counterintuitive, right? But Durant is very upfront about his complex reasons. It wasn't simple.
Okay, so what were they?
He says it was partly to please Father Mooney, this man he respected so much.
Okay, loyalty, respect. Makes sense.
Then partly to avoid a crisis in my family.
So family pressure, expectations.
Seems likely. Avoiding conflict at home. But the third reason is the most revealing, I think.
Which was?
Partly in the hope of turning the Catholic Church in America toward cooperation with the socialist movement.
Wow. Okay, hold on. So he's entering the seminary hoping to make the church socialist.
Essentially, yes. It's an incredible ambition, isn't it?
So what does this all mean? This isn't just about faith, is it? It's about social justice and changing the world.
Precisely. His idealism hadn't vanished. It had just shifted its focus. By 1906, he says, he'd already replaced his Christian creed with a dream of socialism as the hope of the world.
And that phrase he uses. So utopia comes up as heaven goes down.
It captures it perfectly. He's trading a divine, otherworldly salvation for an earthly, social one.
Socialism becomes the new path to a better world.
Exactly. It filled that need for a guiding philosophy, for meaning, for a grand narrative of progress. But it was now secular, political.
But trying to reconcile that with Catholic orthodoxy inside a seminary.
Yeah, you can see how that wasn't going to last, right?
Seems impossible.
And it was. By 1911, he says he found it impossible to continue my pretenses to orthodoxy.
The split became unavoidable.
Completely. And the fallout was significant. Much grief to my parents, he writes.
You feel the weight of that family disappointment.
Absolutely. But also the personal cost for him. Years of mental chaos and loneliness to myself.
It wasn't just walking away. It was a crisis.
A profound one. Think about it. Your whole framework for understanding the world, your identity, your planned future, just collapses.
Leaving a huge void.
Exactly. A deeply isolating, disorienting void. It underscores how hard it is to leave behind beliefs that are tied up with family, community, your sense of self. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the collapse of deeply held faith isn't just about what you stop believing. It's about the void it leaves and what you try to build in its place.
And Durant felt that void very acutely.
Oh, absolutely. He makes this really powerful point. Those who are deeply indoctrinated with Catholicism in their adolescence never quite recover from the collapse of their faith.
Never quite recover. That's strong.
It is. And he thinks Catholicism is particularly potent in this regard. He calls it the most attractive of religions.
Why, specifically?
Because it's rich in drama, poetry, and art, and tender to the flesh. It appeals to the senses, the emotions, the aesthetic.
And he suggests that people who leave it, like him, tend to look back with rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah, he says they often idealize it. They start forgetting its elements of absurdity, terror, and intolerance.
And instead they remember.
They remember how the creed and ritual gave this magnificent ethos, this grand story. that gave meaning and dignity to the simplest life.
How it disciplined people, brought comfort.
Exactly. Comfort in pain, bereavement, defeat. He acknowledges the immense psychological and social support it provides.
Which makes its absence feel like a real loss.
A profound one.
Mm.
He talks about this sense of irreparable loss that he personally felt for like 25 years, for 1906 to 1931.
A quarter of a century. Wow.
And the way he describes it,
Mm-hmm.
he compares his wondering and anguish to what the French existentialists felt after the World Wars.
That's a heavy comparison. Sartre, Camus,
Yeah.
that level of grappling with meaninglessness.
Precisely. It tells you this wasn't just intellectual doubt for Durant. It was a deep existential crisis, a feeling of being spiritually homeless.
So how did he try to, well, fill that void, or at least make sense of it?
He embarked on this really interesting project of symbolic reinterpretation. He tried, as he put it, to keep some hold on the religion of my youth by interpreting its basic doctrines as symbols that gave popular expression to philosophic truths.
So not believing literally, but finding symbolic meaning, like modern wisdom hidden in old stories.
Exactly. It's a way to salvage the value without the dogma.
Okay, give us some examples. How did he reinterpret things?
Well, take original sin. He didn't see it as, Adam and Eve's literal mistake.
Right.
He saw it as symbolizing man's inherited disposition to follow those instincts of pugnacity, sexual promiscuity, and greed.
So like our basic, sometimes problematic human nature, our evolutionary baggage almost.
Pretty much. The taint of ancestral passions in our blood, as he puts it. Something society needs to manage.
Okay, interesting. What about the expulsion from paradise? Eating the forbidden fruit.
He saw that as a kind of forecast of Ecclesiastes' somber warning. He that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow.
So knowledge isn't always comfortable. It can destroy innocence.
Right. It can shatter a happy innocence and many a comforting or inspiring delusion. There's a cost to knowing things sometimes.
And Adam's actual sin.
He gives that a very human spin. He calls it man's forgivable surrender to the witchery of woman and the ecstasy of her charms.
Huh. Less cosmic fall, more relatable human weakness.
Exactly. And heaven and hell.
Not actual places.
Nope. More like states of mind often associated with virtue and vice in this life. The consequences felt here and now, internally.
And Christ's teachings. He still admired those, right?
Deeply. He saw Christ as the personification of godliness, because if everyone actually followed his code of conduct,
It would create paradise on earth.
even poverty and earthly paradise, yeah, that's the power of the ethics.
Yeah.
But he wasn't uncritical.
Oh.
He notes caveats like
Right.
Christ rejecting his mother or the bitter words about hell. He acknowledged the complexities.
So this whole reinterpretation project, what was the driving force behind it? Was it just intellectual exercise or trying to hang on to something?
I think it was multi-layered. Partly retaining cultural comfort, definitely. Partly finding deeper, enduring philosophical meaning. But also, it seems like a way to salvage the useful aspects of religion, its societal function, without needing literal belief.
You mean its role in society?
Yeah. He really praised Christianity for how it translated moral ideas into powerful pictures, narratives, dramas, and art.
Making ethics accessible, basically.
And effective. Helping to tame the unsocial impulses of mankind. He saw church leaders almost like religious statesmen.
Using the tools of religion, Bible, ritual, theology for a practical purpose.
To transform congenital savages into responsible and orderly citizens. It's a very pragmatic view of religion's historical role as a civilizing force, recognizing its utility even as a non-believer.
It sounds like Durant, after all that personal upheaval, still held on to a hope for a peaceful coexistence, a kind of gentleman's agreement.
That's a good way to put it. He definitely dreamt of a reconciliation between religion and philosophy.
And he had specific terms in mind for this agreement.
He did. On one side, philosophers, the educated elite, they should essentially agree to disagree quietly. They would leave uncriticized the pictorial and consolatory creeds of simple souls.
So respect the popular faith. Don't tear it down just because it's not philosophically rigorous.
Exactly. It's a call for a certain intellectual humility, recognizing that popular faith meets real human needs for comfort and meaning.
Needs that abstract philosophy maybe doesn't satisfy for everyone.
Right. Not everyone has the time or inclination for deep philosophical dives. Popular religion provides that vital support.
Okay, so that's one side. What about the other side? The churches.
The churches, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, they needed to reciprocate. They would refrain from hampering freedom of thought in circles and publications, accessible only to persons with time and capacity for abstract thought.
Ah, so basically, you let us think freely, and we won't mess with your flock.
That's the essence of it. Intellectual freedom for the thinkers in exchange for respecting popular piety.
Did he think this was actually possible? Had it happened before?
He thought so, yes. He pointed to historical examples where something like this, maybe imperfectly, seemed to work.
Where?
He mentions Italy under Leo X, the Renaissance Pope, right? A time of great art and ideas, humanism alongside faith.
Okay.
Also, England in the Victorian Compromise. Think Darwin and traditional religion finding ways to sort of coexist, carving out separate spheres.
Science and faith not constantly at war, maybe.
Or at least managing a truce.
Yep.
And finally, Vienna, in the days of Schnitzler and Freud.
A hotbed of new ideas, psychoanalysis, philosophy alongside traditional structures.
Right. These were times and places where, he argued, diverse intellectual and religious currents managed to exist together without constant suppression or conflict.
So for you listening, it makes you wonder, how realistic is this kind of compromise today?
Yeah, it feels quite idealistic, doesn't it? What kind of society allows for that? What cultural attitudes make it possible versus the intense clashes we often see?
Good question. Because right after describing this ideal compromise.
Exactly. This raises an important question. While Durant dreams of reconciliation, he also casts a very cautious, almost wary eye on what he perceives as a coming demographic and political shift.
Yeah, his tone shifts quite dramatically here, doesn't it?
It really does. He makes this incredibly stark statement. Only a similar compromise could reconcile me to the coming control of American life by the Catholic Church.
Whoa. Coming control, he saw it as inevitable.
He seemed to. He pointed to evidence, as he saw it. The Church already controls South America, is powerful in Mexico and French Canada, establishing a pattern.
And then he turns his focus to the U.S.
Right, where he believed its future ascendancy is guaranteed by the higher birth rate of its adherents.
A demographic argument. More Catholics means more Catholic influence.
Pure numbers, basically. And he backs this up. He cites a specific study.
The Princeton one from 1967.
That's the one. It apparently showed Roman Catholic wives were having, and expected to have, 21% more children than non-Catholic wives.
That's a significant difference.
It is. Now, he does add a nuance. He acknowledges the gap was shrinking a bit due to more Catholics using birth control.
Okay, so he saw the trend slowing.
Slowing, yes, but not stopping. He lists factors that he thought guaranteed a continued rise, even if slower.
Such as?
Things like the generally higher birth rate among less educated groups compared to more educated ones. The Church's official opposition to contraception, even if not always followed.
And a strong community sense.
Yeah, the esprit de corps of the Catholic population and clergy. A powerful combination of demography, doctrine, and community cohesion in his view.
And he didn't just see this as a demographic shift, but a political one, too.
Oh, absolutely. He connected the dots directly to political power.
What was his prediction there?
Pretty blunt. Many of our larger cities are already under Catholic control. That control will, in the near future, extend to many legislatures. By 2100, it may.
He leaves it hanging, but the implication is national dominance.
That seems to be the clear implication. A future where Catholic influence shapes American governance profoundly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He then asks a crucial question about the future leadership of this rising power.
Yes, this is pivotal. He asks, essentially, what kind of leaders will emerge? What kind of men will those triumphant priests be?
And he frames it as a choice, right? Between two historical models.
A stark dichotomy. Will they be as tolerant as Leo VIII and Benedict XIV, or as dogmatic and domineering as Gregory VII and Innocent III?
So open and tolerant or authoritarian and dogmatic. The whole future hinges on that.
That's his framing. The character of the leadership determines everything.
Maybe give us a quick reminder of who these popes were. Leo X and Benedict XIV, they represent tolerance.
Right. Leo X was the Renaissance Pope, Medici family, patron of arts, presided over a relatively open intellectual climate even as the Reformation began. Benedict XIV, the 18th century, known as learned, engaged with enlightened ideas, science, fostered dialogue. More accommodating figures.
Okay, and the other side, Gregory VII and Innocent III.
They represent peak papal power, but in a more assertive, controlling way. Gregory VII, 11th century, massively expanded papal authority over emperors and kings. Innocent III, 13th century, think major crusades, formalizing the Inquisition, consolidating church supremacy, figures associated with dominance, less tolerance for dissent.
So Durant is basically asking, will a powerful American Catholicism resemble the open Renaissance or the assertive Middle Ages?
That's the core of his question. Which historical path will it follow when it achieves the power he predicts?
And did he see patterns in his own time that informed this?
He did. He made an observation about how the church operated based on his power level.
Which was?
He said the hierarchy tends to be intolerant where it is supreme, citing Spain and South America at the time.
Where they had dominant power.
Exactly. But, he noted, it favors and needs toleration where Catholic power is checked by other religions or by secular education or by the current prestige of science.
Ah, so tolerance is more pragmatic, a strategy used when they don't have total control.
That's certainly the implication. It adapts its stance based on the circumstances.
But he worried that those checks, science, secular education, might weaken.
He did. He worried that the prestige of science may be ruined by a war murderous beyond any precedent. A chilling thought mid-century.
Removing a key counterweight to religious authority.
And he worried that the independence of secular education would increasingly be subject to legislatures increasingly Catholic, a slow erosion of secular influence from within.
Did he have examples of this happening?
He pointed to a specific instance concerning federal aid to education in the U.S. He claimed it was held up by Catholic influence until the president and Congress agreed to extend aid to Catholic schools and colleges.
Which he saw as violating
The separation of church and state, using political leverage to gain public funds for religious institutions.
And he also mentioned the tax exemption issue.
Right. Freedom of ecclesiastical property from taxation. He saw that, too, as violating the Constitution, basically government aid to religion.
And having a practical impact.
A huge one, placing an ever greater burden upon the tax-paying public as tax-exempt church property grows.
And this led him to a pretty dramatic historical comparison.
Extremely dramatic. He compared the situation to the crisis of France in 1792.
Pre-revolutionary France.
Exactly. Remember the context.
Yeah.
Government broke, people heavily taxed, yet the church held vast tax-free wealth.
A major source of resentment that fueled the revolution.
Precisely. Durant is warning that a similar situation, vast tax-exempt religious wealth, alongside high public taxes and struggling government finances, could create explosive social instability in America, too.
It's a powerful warning, suggesting the church's approach to power and wealth might be pragmatic, but potentially dangerous in the long run.
It shows his deep concern about unchecked power and the potential for historical patterns to repeat.
So what does this all mean? After all these concerns, all this analysis, where does Durant land on the future of religion itself?
Well, despite everything, he ends on a surprisingly pragmatic, even accepting note. He fundamentally believes religion is here to stay.
He dismisses the death of God idea.
Completely. He says quite bluntly, I consider the death of God to have been as exaggerated as Mark Twain's.
Huh. So all the talk in intellectual circles back then about society moving beyond God, he just didn't buy it.
Didn't buy it at all. He saw it as fundamentally misunderstanding something deep about humanity.
And his reason for religion's staying power.
It boils down to inequality, a fundamental, inescapable aspect of the human condition, in his view.
Explain that. How does inequality guarantee religion's survival?
His premise is that people are born unequal physically, mentally, so an inequality of status and possessions seems unavoidable unless you have total dictatorship, which doesn't last.
Okay, inequality is a given.
Right. And even if general living standards rise, the least affluent nations and classes will still feel and protest against their exclusion. There will always be relative deprivation.
And religion steps into that gap.
Exactly. Historically, he says, the underprivileged have always sought consolation in supernatural beliefs.
How does it console them?
In a few ways. It dignifies them, connects them to mystic powers, gives them worth beyond their material status.
And it offers hope.
Crucially, it tempers the sting of poverty with hopes of a better fortune in another world, makes present suffering bearable by promising future reward.
Are there other drivers besides poverty?
Oh, yes. He mentions chronic illness, deformity, or grief. Basically, any profound human suffering can push people towards faith for solace.
And these beliefs stick around even when societies get richer.
They can, through social heredity, passed down culturally, generation to generation, woven into families and communities, even in prosperous nations.
So, because religion fulfills all these fundamental human needs, consolation, meaning dignity, hope.
Because so many of the functions that supernatural religion fulfills, Durant concludes that the skeptic must learn to make his peace with it.
Not convert, but accept its enduring presence.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic acceptance. Recognize its flaws, its dogmas, but also its indispensable role for vast numbers of people dealing with life's hardships.
And his final wish in the chapter.
It's quite poignant. He hopes that the love which radiated from Christ will overcome the fearful intolerance of empowered creeds.
A hope that the best aspects of religion might win out over the worst.
Precisely. It shows his complex stance, clear-eyed about the dangers, but still yearning for the compassionate ideal at its heart.
That truly is a poignant and nuanced note to end on a remarkable blend of resignation to religion's enduring presence, a profound understanding of its human utility, and a lingering, almost wistful desire for the positive aspects of faith to ultimately prevail over its potential for intolerance.
Yeah, it really shows that even after leaving Orthodox belief, and despite his worries, he still saw the potential good, that core of love and compassion.
This deep dive into Will Durant's Fallen Leaves has indeed taken us on an expansive and intensely personal journey. We've moved from the simple innocence of his Catholic childhood through the intellectual challenge that ultimately unraveled his faith.
hmm Examined his insightful philosophical reinterpretation of core doctrines, and finally arrived at his cautious, almost prophetic prognosis for religion's future, especially here in America.
He doesn't just dismiss it, he tries to understand, really understand, the deep human needs that belief fulfills.
With empathy and real intellectual rigor.
Yeah. So, as we close this deep dive, what stands out to you from Durant's very personal exploration of faith and reason? Durant suggests that even if knowledge, as Ecclesiastes warned, increases sorrow, and even if we find ourselves reinterpreting old doctrines as new symbols to make sense of a changing world, the fundamental human need for consolation, for meaning, and for a sense of dignity seems to endure, perhaps irrevocably. So we're left to wonder, in a world that continues to wrestle with deep-seated inequalities, chronic suffering, and existential questions, is the search for something transcendent, or at least something deeply, profoundly meaningful, and inherent and unshakable part of the human condition, regardless of whether it ultimately manifests as traditional faith, a new secular ideology, or something entirely different that humanity has yet to conceive? What forms will our enduring search for meaning take next?